All right,
Whew.
here we go. So basically, we have Toronto artists like and creative SuKha Never Dies like on the platform today and all that. So basically, she has released like a project like the Ugly Brown Girl Mixtape back in like 2020 and all that. And I think this is like a first time like kind of discussing everything and all that too, just like with the music and everything else too. So I just wanted to check how are you doing today.
I'm doing good. It's morning here, so I'm the sun is warming me, even though it's winter.
Yeah, that's facts. So I know like you're currently based in Japan right now, but like you were like very prevalent like when the in the Toronto music scene within like late 2010s, early 2020s and all that too. Like I've actually seen you at a couple events and I think we've interacted before here and there. Like I've seen you at a Rico Nasty show and then also at the Unlisted Negro show back, I think in 2022, I think so. And then basically just checked out your music from there, just checked out like all of your stuff, like followed you on IG, and it's amazing to see and all that, you know?
hmm I'm based in the south of Japan. Um, and yeah, it's a big change, really, because I think pre COVID, the music scene was just so vibrant, and I was doing like shows every weekend. Every weekend, I was like somewhere in Toronto. Um, but now there's less action.
That's facts. So I want to get it like started for a bit too. So like where did you grow up and like what was like the environment like for you growing up? Would you say you had a great childhood at the time or was it like very like different and all that?
So I actually was born in Saudi Arabia. And most people don't really know much about Saudi Arabia, especially, the West, like America and Canada. We know very little about Saudi Arabia. But I was born there, but I'm actually not Saudi Arabian. My parents are Bangladeshi. And so basically, back in the 90s, um, if you were not by blood Saudi Arabian, you couldn't attend the schools, public schools, but private schools are okay. So basically, my parents would kind of work, send me to private school over there. But when people think private school, they think like American private school, like, oh, so rich, so well off with all that stuff, right? But not exactly. You can imagine they were all migrant workers. So migrant workers from Ethiopia, migrant workers from Philippines, uh, anybody who's not Saudi Arabian who left their country to come to Saudi Arabia to work had to enroll their children into those private schools. It's not remotely the same caliber and level of American private schools. But I did have a uniform, and so yeah, that was my life there. And I was so basically you were segregated in that sense because you didn't go to public school, right? So your community kind of becomes all these migrant workers and their kids. And so many of us actually didn't speak Arabic because we were in school in English school. So we would all speak to each other in English and we all had different accents. It was really cool, like all these kids speaking to each other
Yeah.
in different accents. And yeah, and then I immigrated to Canada when I was pretty young, like 9 or 10 years old. Old but young, I guess, because old enough to remember my life in Saudi. Um, but at least the language there was English. So, because like I said, in Saudi Arabia, I was segregated, so I didn't learn Arabic. So then I moved here to Canada, and it was like war of terror era. So there's a lot of racism towards anything that has to do with the Middle East or anybody that looks remotely brown or Muslim. So yeah, that was kind of like a totally different world for me. Also, not being segregated anymore. That was kind of interesting too, right? Like you're like actually with the locals. Uh, and to be put in Toronto of all the places in Canada too, it's really great because you have people of all different faces, uh, kind of like living together. Um, and we're all like kind of like Americanized ethnic people. My idea of America was just like white people and black people, you know? It was like America is just black and white people. But like it was kind of shocking to see so many different faces with the same accent. Like
Yeah.
everybody sounded the same. I didn't have this accent. I adopted this accent later,
Yeah.
um, living
That's
here.
actually, yeah, that's actually pretty interesting to hear because I know like Saudi Arabia at the time too. Like I know Riyadh was like kind of like starting to like grow as like one of the like the main cities within like the Middle East too, like in terms of like the oil fields and all that, in terms of like the businesses opportunities in that sense too. And then like it had like some controversy here and there too because of the stuff going on like in the early 2000s, but then like I noticed like how that changes like with like other situations as well too. And like it is like interesting to see too like how the change of a city can like be like that, and like even your experience just like being from there to Toronto and all that. No, so
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely different. Like, um, yeah, I mean, literally the climate is different too, right? I went from like a desert to like Canada, which is completely different. So people often would ask me things like they thought Saudi Arabia was underdeveloped, but it's on par with first world country. Like they got oil money. So I grew up with basically a metropolis just like Toronto, but the difference is that um, you know, one is a desert climate, the same as Japan has Japan's climate, right? Canada has Canada's climate. So yeah,
yeah.
it's a cool place. It really is a beautiful country, like really underrated.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like interesting to hear and all that. And like with Saudi Arabia and like even like in Toronto, like in so like just like in Saudi Arabia in general, like was it like big for music and the creative arts at the time? Or like didn't start like honing into like the arts and the creativity until you moved to Toronto and all that?
Yeah, so because well, you know, I wasn't really like even though I was born in Saudi, I wasn't considered a local. So there was a music scene, but I wouldn't really be included because I don't speak Arabic. So um so yeah, I was definitely it was more so in Toronto and like I mentioned earlier because of the segregate like I mean the war on terror era, like all the discrimination and stuff like that, I actually got into more like alternative music. Like I actually was before I was listening to more like hip hop. Um, I was actually listening to heavy metal. I was huge into heavy metal and alternative in general, like alternative music. So like my favorite band at the time was like System of a Down, and because they were making a lot of music about the war and criticizing like political leaders um, and things like that. So, I mean, yeah, there's always a popular ones too, like Korn or like Metallica or Megadeth. But I found like System of a Down had that like anger and the flair that like I wanted to hear because I had all this frustration, but I didn't have the language because I wasn't so good at English either. But it had the language to kind of like express this feeling that I was feeling, but I didn't have the words to. So yeah, it was Toronto where I found my music for sure.
Yeah, that's facts. Like I was actually reading like a little like comic strip like a long time ago called like Parasopolis and all that, and it was kind of like a girl that kind of grew up within the Islamic like regime of like Iran at that time too, and like basically like she was like listening, but it was like based off The Offer actually. So basically she was like listening to like a lot of like 1970s like rock, 1980s like rock and all that, like the Police, the Clash, like all that sort of stuff too. And then you can like really like listen to that like kind of like growing up around those times too. So she had to kind of move out and all that, and like her influences and her story kind of like honed in like with the music, and like she got like involved around like the culture at that time when she was like living in like Germany and like Paris and all that too. So I could definitely see like how
Yeah,
like
I
those like
love it. It's like it's like if you wear if you veil or like if you're Muslim, that book is like kind of like you know
yeah,
it's a very important book. I read it
that's
when I
facts.
was actually in that time. So when I had first immigrated and I was like getting into heavy metal and all that stuff, it was one of the first books that I was like, this is the book. This is, she gets me. She gets me. She's like me. It was like the first representation that I actually felt like I got. So yeah, it's interesting that you bring that book up because it's the same time that I had read the book.
Yeah, nah, it's amazing, and like I definitely like recommend it as well too for people that want to like tap into that type of style and all that, like with comic strips and like even with like that bit of like history for a bit too. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
what were you kind of like, from birth until like the start of like adulthood, like kind of like just like honed in like within the music and creativity, or have you had like other like interests and all that?
I actually never thought I would get into music because I was more into fashion since I was a kid. So even in Saudi Arabia, like I was always kind of a diva, even as a kid. Like my mom would always like dress me up and stuff like that, and I was like doing cute modeling pics. Uh, you know, even when I was a kid in our film cameras. Um, but yeah, I was actually more so doing fashion design, and so I started showing up to these events. Um, in Toronto, and so it was more like in university, actually, first year university, end of high school, early university years. I started like going out to like spoken word events in Scarborough. I'm from Scarborough. And then from Scarborough, branching out to like the West End and like attending more events, just meeting people, hearing the words, and started going to events and like meeting a lot of like, just like meeting a lot of like artists in Toronto. Um, like one of the first people that I had met was Max, um, and then Max and Ida Sophia. She's like an amazing rapper from Toronto, so she was kind of like my first like way into kind of like, oh my gosh, there's like people doing stuff like making music um so yeah, like there's a lot of Toronto artists that kind of inspired me to make music, but it wasn't music first, it was my fashion. I would just show up to these events with like my outfits that I would make, and then yeah.
Yeah. Now, like when I saw you like at the Rico Nasty event too, like you kind of had like a very unique fit that kind of like fit like onto like the rage thing and all that too, and like I kind of like enjoy that kind of style and all that, with like different textures because it kind of showcases that idea of rebellion, but like also like showcasing like your culture in a way and all that, so.
Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a huge part of what I do. I try to show the mess that I am.
That's facts. And like as far as like your creative like background in history, did you had like any like family or anyone like around you that kind of got into the creative arts at that time? And what inspired you to become like an artist and like even like take it like seriously as a profession and all that?
I come from a very creative family because basically I'm Bangladeshi, right, or Bengali. Like ethnically, I'm Bengali, and my culture is very like poetic and artistic. Like we have a lot of like music and dance, and we have like a rich cultural background in that. Um, but um, but nothing like the alternative stuff, like traditional stuff, right? So, like my grandpa was kind of a poet, and like my mom grew up with music, and so on and so forth. But for me, I'm definitely the black sheep of the family because um, what I do makes no sense to anybody. Um, yeah, it just kind of happened. I think that like most artists in the alternative music scene and fashion scene, it's kind of like that exclusion that you experience, just feeling isolated and alienated, um, and then not having the words to express it. You find yourself expressing through fashion and music. I fall under that same umbrella where um, even though I didn't have any influences in particular, I just kind of branched out on my own.
That's facts. And with your style, like how would you like even like describe it to people? Like even when you like amalgamate it like within like the music, like the fashion and creativity, does it have like a one word definition to, or do you feel like it has like a multitude of like definitions and all that?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I definitely feel like um, I think that it's kind of interesting because um, the Muslim world in general, like Arab women have their own fashion and style surrounding veiling from a very, very, very long time. Um, and so that already exists, like way before my fashion, but Americans don't know about that, right? So, like, a lot of countries where the majority are Muslim, so like Egypt itself traditionally has an aesthetic of their own, like their makeup, which is very purely Egyptian. And because majority are Muslim, many women kind of have that aesthetic of veiling a certain way that they veil, and they kind of come out with their cultural clothes. Same with like Palestinian women, they have their own kind of swag. And then Saudi Arabian women too, like they go really hard on like the eyeliner, and like how they do their eyeliner is really, really unique. So I already grew up with that influence, watching veiled women being incredibly fashionable. In Saudi Arabia, abaya fashion was like huge, and like the fashion in Saudi Arabia was really, really cool. But you would never know if you're American, obviously, because it's like a completely different part of the world. So I grew up watching incredibly fashionable veiled women, like super fashionable. And then and then coming to Canada, I got exposed to like a completely different world. And I think hip hop fashion really made its way in Saudi Arabia, because I remember watching MTV in Saudi Arabia. So a lot of like, like Destiny's Child, or like even like actually just pop culture in general. Like Britney was pretty big in Saudi Arabia too. Like Britney, Christina Aguilera, and like just like that, the early 2000s scene. We were listening to that stuff too. So it was kind of like, um, yeah, and TLC, all of that stuff. Yeah, like that really influenced me as a kid, and it influenced Arab culture at the time too, right? So there was also a lot of belts being worn, um, and like that really like pale eye makeup, all that stuff was going on in Saudi Arabia too. And then in Canada, I think I got into like anime, huge, huge into anime. Um, so that really inspired my fashion as well, like Japanese fashion. And I got into like like I never wore it, but I would like save photos of like gyaru fashion, and like a lot of like a Japanese alternative fashion, because Japanese culture is very conservative too. So the fashion in Japan has a lot to do with the political statement as well, to break free from the conservative Japanese culture. Um, so I found that really, really inspiring as well. And so, yeah, it's kind of a combination of like Arab fashion and then Japanese fashion. And last but not least, I am Bengali, and we have our own jewelry, and we have our own culture. We have so um, I think that that also impacted it. So yeah, those three things, I think you see it too. I think that like once I explain it and then you see my fashion, it kind of makes sense, like uh, how those elements kind of work together and create my fashion.
Yeah, that's facts. Because like whenever I see like Bengali people outside, or like with Pakistani people outside too, like a lot of the
Mhm,
women and men like are very like
mhm.
colorful, like in terms of like how they
They are very
present themselves too.
colorful.
Because like I've seen like like the dads and the uncles like with the like colored like beard and all that.
Weird. Oh my god.
I see like a lot of them like with like the colorful like clothes and all that too, whereas like with other cultures like they'll tend to be like more plaid and all that, or like they'll wear like white, like like more of a balance. But like with Bengali and Pakistani people, like they show out like when it comes to the attire and all that, so
Yeah, yeah, like South Asia for sure. Like the colonial British India zone. Yeah, we're
yeah.
definitely colorful.
That's facts. And as far as like influences, like what like artists or creatives or genres are you mainly like influenced by, and like who would you like to work with like someday, whether it's like music or fashion?
It's really funny that you say that you saw me at the Rico Nasty concert because every time Rico Nasty would come to Toronto, I was there. I even gave her like one of my designs once and like met her backstage twice. I don't think she remembers me, but whatever. I remember her. But no, it would be really I feel like I'm still growing as an artist because I did this completely on my own, right? Like no support or anything. So my yeah, I would definitely love to work with some artists like Rico Nasty. I also love the new Doja Cat too. Like I love her new vibe. Um, but also like how cool would it be to like be able to work with like System of a Down or something like that too. Um, but yeah, like I said, I'm still kind of honing my skills. Like my first mixtape was just kind of like I just wanted to do something. I just wanted to do something. It wasn't about being an artistic masterpiece. It was about becoming SuKha Never Dies. That was the purpose of the Ugly Brown Girl Mixtape. It was to become something. So
Okay. And was there like ever like any like inspiration behind that project, or was it like
it was
an
a
amalgam?
random, yeah. So I grew up watching Naruto a lot, right? And like Naruto would basically like make friends with like anybody. He would just like go to different lands and then like become friends with people and like do amazing things with them. So basically, when I was in my early 20s, um, I started traveling a lot. So I would like go to New York City or like it's just solo traveling. I had no money in the bank, no parents' approval. I just like would pack my shit, pack my fashion, pack my jewelry, pack my fucking thigh high boots, and I would just like go to London or go to South Africa or like I don't know. I would fuck off somewhere, and I would like literally meet friends on the spot. Like it was crazy. Like it was just like I felt like my life was like an anime, you know? And I would just make music. I would just make music, and that's what the project is. The project is literally a mishmash of uh, like you know people who I've worked with, kind of like all over the world. Or even I think most of my producers are actually from Toronto. I'm not gonna lie, but Toronto itself feels like people from all over the world. But yeah, it was unplanned. Um, I just made a whole bunch of music without meaning to. So I just wanted to put it all together.
That's facts.
Yeah.
And the staging, it's actually like very interesting too. So I'm assuming like SuKha is like your actual like government name, but like Never Dies, like how did that like come about?
So basically, um, when I was actually making music, I was like, and I was traveling a lot. Uh, the courage to do all that actually came from me being kind of like suicidal because I was like, I can't kill myself, but I don't care if somebody else kills me. It's really stupid. I'm sorry. It's really dark, but like, it was kind of like I wasn't afraid of death. I was not afraid of death. Like I'm literally just like I was very naive. You can imagine when you're in your early 20s, you don't know shit about the world, especially when you're a woman. The world is just there to eat you up, right? Like it's kind of dangerous, and I'm visibly kind of like brown and Muslim, and like um it's just not very safe. And I wasn't in very safe situations, truthfully. I was a starving artist. I was traveling as a starving artist. I was not safe. And originally my name used to be SuKha Will Die. And I was like, that's so bleak. That's so bleak. That's so bleak. And so SuKha actually means like happiness or enlightenment. And so I thought it would be like really cool if it was SuKha Never Dies. And I thought it was more positive. I thought it was more rebellious. It's kind of like in a world where everybody wants me dead, in a world where people don't want to hear my voice, you know, it's going to be SuKha Never Dies.
That's
So,
facts. And like I know that you talked about like working with like Ida and working with like Max and all that too. So, what was like that experience like, meeting like many like-minded people like within the Toronto scene and all that?
mm, yeah, like I can't even like begin to name all the artists, you know? Like I'm friends with so many of them too, like Icotonic and then uh oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm doing injustice. I'm like embarrassing myself by not remembering everybody's names, but I think that it was really eye-opening because everybody's like an immigrant, you know, or like their
Yeah.
parents are immigrants, all these artists, right, that I'm talking about. So yeah, like everybody kind of dealing with their own identity problems made me feel I think Toronto's the only place where I could have became SuKha Never Dies. No other place in the world because Toronto's so multicultural. We all understand. Like obviously it's different being from Somalia or Eritrea versus being Bengali or Pakistani, right? It's obviously different, but somehow, even though our worlds are parallel, we understand and we support each other and we respect the identity crisis or the differences that we may have felt. Um, so yeah, I think that I was really grateful to have all these artists around me from different backgrounds.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And like, like see like also like at the Unlisted Negro show too, because I think like everyone like connects like within like different like cultures and like different entities and all that. Like I'm Ethiopian, so basically like I hone into my culture, but like I'm also opening to like learning from like other cultures, like learning different sounds, styles, like like fashion sense and all that too. And like I think like it amalgamates into like this like melting pot where we're all like together and all that, like and not like within like this like cultural mosaic where it's just like panned out to see what Canadian culture is like or what like mainstream Western culture is like and all that. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. So grateful. Toronto is like really special, I think. Like it's kind of funny because it's like a totally colonial pet of capitalism where we all kind of speak the same language even though we're from different
yeah,
places and we came here just to make American and Canadian businesses more money, um but on the writer side there's this really interesting place where with English we're translating our cultures and experiences. It's cool.
that's facts. And to speak more on your hiatus, like you managed to take a hiatus from like music and like the arts like in general. So tell me more about that and like what were like some factors that kind of played within that hiatus?
Yeah, so basically, right before COVID, I felt like I was popping off. I was like signed up for all these festivals and I was just like ready, you know? Like, I was like, all right, let's go, Miss International, you know? But then COVID happened and like, I think financial things hit, and I was like, fuck, like, unfortunately, I can't make money out of my art anymore. Um, I was making very little money with arts even before, but I was still making something, even if it was like $100 a month. You know, that's something. Um, and uh, and so I was kind of like working like low end jobs, and then I was like, damn, like I don't want to be like in my late 20s because I don't. We didn't know how COVID was gonna go on for right. The first year we were like, okay, it's gonna be gone soon, but it just shit dragged on. It was like 2, 3 years. It was just like never ending, you know. And I kind of had to, and for me, my music had so much to do with traveling and like being an explorer and meeting people and like I told you how my mixtape was made, right? I was just kind of like Naruto, like traveling all over the world and like making friends and making music. Like that was taken away from me, so I couldn't do that anymore. Um, So yeah, COVID really hurt me, I think.
And like it like kind of like led to you to like moving like to Japan and all that. So to explain more, like how was like that transition like from moving from like one country to another and like what made you decide like on moving to Japan and all that?
Yeah, so basically I was literally not finding work in Toronto. So I actually moved to Quebec And I got really good at French. That's good. And then after that, I basically found a position in Japan through a company, and I was like, why not? I was like, why not? You know. But not gonna lie, one of my worst depression pits I hit here. But my first 3 months of living in Japan was probably one of my worst emotional days of my life. But now I feel like I'm doing better. Like I'm making music again. I'm like full fledged back into the arts. I'm re releasing my music videos because I had taken them all down. So I'm releasing Never Fight a Bitch again by the end of this month. So all good news.
Okay. And as far as like all the other stuff too, so like, do you have anything else in the works too? And do you have any like closing remarks you'd like to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to release Never Fight a Bitch. The music videos, there's two. And actually, I would love to shoot another one, another version in actually Japan. I'm working on music with some Japanese producers. And yeah, we'll see what's coming. I'm not pushing myself too hard because of the mental health reasons, but I'm definitely re becoming SuKha Never Dies.